Welcome to Community Green TiniHabitat Podcast, where we explore the extraordinary journeys of different individuals. I'm your host, Yusuf, and today we have an exceptional guest with us, Dr. Sam Gandy, a lifelong nature lover. Sam holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychological Geography, a Master of Research in Entomology, and a PhD in Ecological Science. His passion has led him to conduct extensive fieldwork in various parts of the world and to become an experienced science communicator, focusing on the crucial connection between humans and nature. Sam is also a collaborator with the Centre of Psychedelic Research at Imperial College London, where his research on psychedelics and their impact on our relationship with nature is making waves in the scientific community. Today, we dive into his incredible journey, his research, and his unique insights into the synergies between nature, psychedelics, and mental health. Welcome, Dr. Sam Gandy.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to be chatting.
How are you doing today?
Uh, I'm pretty good. I'm a bit tired. Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, but one thing that I'm wondering is, in the background, do you have mushrooms in the background?
Oh, where are you looking in particular?
Right now, on me, it's a bit blurry, but there is the green thing and on the right side of the thing.
Yeah, okay, so next to the leaves in some jars, yeah, there's some lion's mane mycelium on oats that I've dried out and have yet to sort of prepare. So yes, well spotted.
Yeah, okay, cool. If we get onto the questions, one of the first things that I want to ask is you've spent a significant part of your life in academia studying various aspects of nature, from physical geography to entomology and ecology. So can you tell us about a defining moment during your studies that shaped your current interest in nature connectedness? Like if you have a specific moment where you remember, I want to do this.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of those moments certainly was at this conference, Breaking Convention, which is happens every it's a psychedelic conference that happens every 2 years in the UK, and there was a symposium at the conference that I was a part of on sort of ecodelics, on sort of the capacity of psychedelics to um, potentially facilitate ecological awareness and concern. And I gave a talk there, but then one of the conference organizers, who's since become a friend and collaborator, sort of semi mentor sometimes, Dr. David Luke, gave a presentation on some of his research, and that was looking at the capacity of psychedelics to facilitate um, connection to nature, so shifts in people's relationships to nature, and also their concern as well, their pro-ecological concern. And obviously, I was coming from a kind of a nature-loving background with a PhD in ecology, and I wasn't aware of any work being done at kind of the intersection of ecology and psychedelics. So, and obviously, I had an interest in both of those things separately. But that was a bit of a wake up call to realize there was work going on at the intersection, and I think it was some of the first work to be done actually. So that's kind of why I hadn't really encountered it before then. So that kind of ignited my interest really. I remember there was one particular slide that David shared that I still kind of bring up in my presentations on this topic now. And in David's sample, he looked at different types of psychedelic and how they and their kind of associations with nature connection and pro nature awareness and concern. And in David's sample, psilocybin mushrooms were definitely top of the pile in terms of their association with eliciting that connection to nature and also concern for it. And that just kind of yeah, that kind of intrigued me. LSD and ayahuasca were no kind of slouches in that department, but they were definitely like kind of roughly joint second place compared to psilocybin, which was definitely kind of like leading the pack. And I kind of wanted to know, like, is this relationship here, this association, is this just a quirk of David's data, or is it a more general pattern that for some reason seems to apply? And so, yeah, it was that kind of realization that there was interesting work starting to be done at this intersection, and I was like, I want to be in this intersection, contributing to this if I can, and that was my on ramp, I guess you could say.
When you go a little bit more back, maybe in your a little bit childhood or elementary school or middle school, something like that, did you always wanted to work on nature? I mean, entomology, ecology, like how did that happen?
Yeah, oh yeah, no, that's been pretty much a lifelong thing, really. Kind of the love for nature. Like nature's been a long term source of um, yeah, peace, joy, fun, intellectual stimulation. It's definitely like enriched my life in a big way, and I've always just had that even before I was really, I think, conscious of the fact. There's photos of me like crawling around, poking around in the garden when I was very, very young. Um, my mum is also a keen nature lover. She loves her birds. She's a bird watcher, so she's always been supportive. My granddad used to take me. There's a lake near where I kind of like grew up when I was very young, and he would take me there walking and sort of pond dipping and stuff. So yeah, I've had family's been supportive as well. Um, so that's always been there, and I think always will be there. And I guess as I got older, I kind of funneled it into sort of, yeah, academia, which I've since departed from. I do a bit of work on the side, so to speak. But yeah, that I think that will always be a key focus in my life.
Okay, okay, very cool. I always ask this to my guests. I'm pretty curious on, I normal people as well. When I meet with a new person, I am really curious about how did they start doing, because for some of us it's hard to discover yourself. For some other people, it's maybe because of their family, maybe because of somebody they met. It's a little bit easier. So I'm a little bit keen on that. My other question is, so you are doing science communicating as well. You have also your Twitter and Instagram, and you're trying to communicate the work. So what do you think the biggest challenge in conveying the importance of nature connectedness in to the general public? And also we are gonna get into your research works as well, but how do you communicate psychedelics to general public too, or like in the governments? It's a bit hard, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. So first things first, regarding nature connectedness, um, I feel like there's a bit of an uphill struggle here in the UK, in that there was a study published recently surveying a range of different countries, primarily European countries, but the UK ranked bottom out of 14 countries surveyed for average levels of nature connectedness. And as an aside to that, independently of that, we're considered one of the most nature depleted parts of the world in terms of the amount of biodiversity that we've lost. And I feel that these two things are linked as well. So yeah, we're kind of dealing with a pretty deeply entrenched disconnect from nature in this country, which I feel like it does make things challenging. There's this whole concept of shifting baseline syndrome, where over time, over centuries, over generations, over decades, essentially we're losing life, we're hemorrhaging life from the land, we're losing habitats, we're losing biodiversity, but we tend to assess what we consider good quality nature or wildlife by, say, our childhood encounters with nature. We don't tend to look beyond our lifespans to previous generations or previous centuries. So essentially, over time, there's this kind of like ratcheting down of environmental quality or sort of biodiversity richness, and that makes things really challenging because people over time become kind of familiar and used to what is essentially a greatly diminished, depleted state of things. And people will actually defend passionately, for example, treeless moorlands in Scotland. Like it might look wild, but it's not. It's very much been human manipulated. There should be trees and woodland there, and people think, wow, no, I don't want there to be trees there. Trees will spoil the view, and things like this. See, so yeah, people will quite passionately defend otherwise highly depleted, degraded landscapes simply because it's what's familiar to them. So that makes things challenging. But what I will say, which is quite hopeful though, is like speaking to someone like my mum, like she's always been a kind of nature nut as well, like me. But when she was young and growing up, nature had quite a kind of like geeky sort of like, it was very fringe topic. Like think about like anoraks and corduroy trousers, and so it was kind of like, yeah, definitely didn't have much. I don't know, we could say street cred. Whereas now, compared, I feel like things have really kind of shifted on that front, and nature's got a lot more mainstream appeal and interest. And I think people are kind of like waking up to how important it is for many reasons. Not obviously just for our mental health and well-being, but all the various ecosystem services that it provides. We depend on thriving living systems. That there's no human well-being without nature's well-being, essentially. And I think people are kind of waking up to that, which is good to see. In terms of communicating psychedelics, and I'm quite sort of, I try to be upfront and honest, and in terms of like how I kind of communicate. I try and be balanced as well. So I give semi-regular talks with this company, Seed Talks, up and down the country, talking about, for instance, the science of psychedelics, or the science of psilocybin, or the science of psychedelics, nature connectedness. It's 3 talks that I tend to give. And I try and like, I want people to have like accurate and kind of rich information, but always try to sort of be, to kind of be balanced, sort of highlight some of the potential benefits that the research is revealing, but not obviously shying away from the potential risks and issues. I certainly don't want to be sugarcoating anything. Um, I've not really engaged that much with politicians. I've like sent the odd email to a few MPs slash the Home Office, but it's just like you might as well shout at a wall or something in terms of actual change resulting from that. So I'm I feel that if I can exert any potential leverage of change at all, and it might only be a small bit of leverage, it's through doing and publishing the research, and then sort of speaking about that and disseminating that, and hopefully making it more accessible to people who are kind of outside the psychedelic field, because it is a bit of a bubble, and I feel like it's important to kind of build bridges beyond it. So I guess that's what I try and do with my communications online, and the talks that I give, and sometimes articles that I write as well. I try and sort of make it accessible, and not accessible to people outside of the psychedelic echo chamber or bubble, hopefully in some small way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, I don't think, there is a small way on this, because, even doing researches on this is, I think, quite important, because I think many scientists are ignoring it, right? And I don't know. I mean, I am not in the academia like you, but I mean, looking in the outside, I feel like some people are ignoring it. So I certainly appreciate, even if it's like small or big, it doesn't matter, because I think it's a right point, right way, in a sense. But okay, so and do you know if I don't know if you want to answer these a little bit more personal, if you go into psychedelics. When did you first discover it? Would you like to share that?
No, I'm happy to. Yeah, it was because it was totally legal. My kind of first experience. So it just so happened when I started my undergraduate degree at Imperial College in London at the time, psilocybin mushrooms were legal. So you could buy tubs of fresh mushrooms on the high street in Camden Town, and then munch them on down. So it was like a heady a heady little window of time, where psilocybin was legally accessible, and that's how I first encountered it. I had a good friend who was also at university with me, and we sort of co-experimented together, I guess you could say. My first experience was a bit of a harrowing experience. We each had this tub of mushrooms and got on the tube and went to this electronic nightclub called Fabric, and it wasn't the it wasn't the ideal setting or scenario for a first initiation into psilocybin, but it didn't kind of scare me off. I definitely learned the whole set and setting rules, and sort of from that I was like, well, I want to experience this again, but approaching it with more humility, more respect, pay greater attention to the setting, the environment I'm doing it in, and who I'm with, and all this stuff. And I did do that, and I feel like I was kind of rewarded for doing so, and that sort of that really ignited my interest. Like when I get interested in something, I get really interested in it. So I kind of wanted to know more. All the different there's so many interesting different facets to the psychedelic thing in terms of the cultural indigenous usage, the effects on the brain, the potential benefits, treatment of mental health afflictions, but also potential betterment of well people, the whole events of the 1960s. There's so many interesting layers to it that I just wanted to know more, and started reading and writing, attending events and conferences, starting to get to know people in the field. I also experienced ayahuasca in Peru as well when I went out there with university, and then on a subsequent trip. So yeah, I've had a few interesting experiences along the way. I was a participant in a trial at Imperial College where I was injected with DMT and an MRI machine, having my brain scanned. So yeah, I've been quite sort of fortunate to have some interesting experiences. Over time.
If we go into the researches that you do on psychedelics, so one of your publication is From Egoism to Ecoism, Psychedelics Increase Nature Relatedness in a State Meditated and Context-Dependent Manner. Sorry if I mediated, right? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, by the way, my English is not my first language, so if I...
Let's go.
Okay. And in this publication, you explored the link between psychedelic use and nature relatedness, right? So can you delve into the key findings from this research?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So I think firstly, it's important for me to define what I mean by what is meant by nature relatedness, because it's complex. It's not just the same, say, as going out into nature. So nature relatedness is essentially capturing or encompassing an individual's relationship with nature, which is deeply personal and subjective, and what we call a multi-dimensional construct, because different aspects of our psychology comprise it. So aspects of our cognition, aspects of our emotions, and also aspects of direct experience as well, and things like personality trait structure. Things like this all sort of meld together to kind of like create our connection or relatedness to nature. And there are three sub-dimensions to nature relatedness that comprise the overall measure. So one of those is NR experience, which is capturing contact with nature, the degree to which we value having contact with nature. NR experience, which is capturing pro-nature, pro-conservation attitudes and behaviors. And then NR self, which is capturing the degree to which we see ourselves as part of nature, part of a larger interconnected web. So you see there's a few different aspects to nature relatedness that comprise it, but it's something quite deeply set, we could say. It's considered primarily as a trait, like personality traits, and something being a trait suggests it's not particularly amenable to change sometimes, traits, because they're quite sort of deeply held aspects of our being. So nature relatedness, it's not the same as, say, going for a nice walk in the woods on a summer's day, coming back and then having this nice afterglow or something like that. Nature relatedness is deeper than that. And so, we'll kind of, with this research, we use a kind of a prospective survey study design. So what that means is we kind of assessed people before they would have a psychedelic experience using this online survey interface, and then we would like assess them afterwards, and then again 2 years later down the line. And yeah, we found this particularly clear signal for total lifetime usage. So the total number of lifetime experiences with classical psychedelics, so your psilocybin, LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, mescaline, things like this, and people's nature relatedness at baseline. And we found that experiences of ego dissolution, so your ego is your subjective sense of self identity, and under high doses of psychedelics that can get pretty wonky or sort of dissolve for temporarily. And it seems that once we lose that sense of existing as a separate individual self from everything around us, it can potentially facilitate this expanded experience of self other or self nature overlap. Or it can allow states of unity, interconnectedness to manifest, I think. So we found an association there, and also people reported back on the settings that they had their psychedelic experience in. And so we took some simple survey data on whether people had access to nature-based settings and the degree to which they felt that setting to be important. And we also found that having experiences, as one might expect, in a more nature-based setting was positively associated with changes in nature relatedness.
Yeah, and when you said 2 years, then these people were taking regularly psychedelics, right?
Yes, so that's a good important point to mention. Yeah, so there was quite an attrition rate, I should say. So we lost quite a lot. So not that many people are motivated to fill in a big study kind of survey thing 2 years after participating in a study. So I think we started with like 654 people going into the study that completed the baseline survey, and then at 2 years it went down to 65. So we hemorrhaged a lot of people over those 2 years. But what was quite interesting and a bit odd was that the people who did fill out the survey were suspiciously nature connected, like nature related. Like they were like way up on their nature relatedness. So it seems like some kind of like self-selection bias may have kind of been at play slightly there, where I guess the more nature related people were more motivated to feed back their data to us. But yes, there had been among quite a few people subsequent psychedelic experiences happening in that 2 year window. So we can't for a good chunk of them say it was specifically down to that psychedelic experience they had. And like quite a lot of the sample were also psychedelic experience group. Like there wasn't many people just having a single psychedelic experience. It tended to be kind of multiple over time.
I am thinking of trying psychedelics myself. Right? I have never taken it before, right? And I was listening into a lot of videos and different kind of perspectives. So from what I gather, what people say is if you have personal problems like psychological problems, and it doesn't even have to be like big psychological problems, like if you didn't solve many things inside you, then you might have bad trips, a lot of bad trips. So I might think those 600 people, maybe they wanted to drop it because maybe they were having bad trips as well.
Well, I mean, so certainly if you've got unresolved like life issues bubbling away underneath the surface, there's a fair chance that psychedelics will confront them. They will bring those up for you to look at. So yeah, I think some people who don't really know about psychedelics and how they work kind of view them as kind of like space cadet escape drugs, and that's sort of misunderstanding partly how they work. And yes, they can produce like fantasy kind of esque experiences, but but if you're exclusively using them because you want to have like fantastical experiences and you've got unresolved stuff under the surface, you're going to run into that. So but we have to also be careful how we kind of label bad trips as well. Like, yes, certainly people have negative, challenging, or even traumatic experiences at times, but it's a lot dependent on the kind of the mindset going into these experiences. So there's a real potential if you do have some unresolved stuff or issues that you could maybe do with some kind of levity and perspective on. If you approach the psychedelic experience in the right way, it could be potentially quite helpful in giving you new perspectives or new insights on life issues. You know, stuff that you can potentially take away from that experience and then sort of act on in your sober waking life. And there's an interesting study, a web-based study, I think, conducted by Johns Hopkins, exclusively looking at challenging experiences that people had had using psilocybin mushrooms in kind of recreational or naturalistic contexts. And I think 84% of the sample, so bearing in mind this sample is exclusively reporting challenging experiences, 84% of the sample said they felt they'd benefited from those experiences. So, it's important to mention that a small minority of people felt that the experience was so challenging that they did seek out emergency, like medical, treatment or hospital, visited hospitals. But it was considering that we were looking exclusively, or it was exclusive, like challenging experience group was being examined. It was a pretty small minority, and the vast majority felt that they'd gained from those experiences. So yeah, how we frame the experiences and how we approach it is important to the outcomes.
Yeah, that's why I think researches on this area is more important as well. For example, people like me, when they I don't know, hear about it somewhere, looking into it. I mean, if we have more scientific research on this, then people will be more informed about this, right? Otherwise, you have videos of individual people explaining these kind of stuff. I mean, that's not that it is bad. Obviously, we need those people as well, but looking at different lenses and knowing some scientific facts would be also important, I think.
I agree with you. I feel like it is important to do the research because we start sort of shining light on aspects of the psychedelic experience or how to kind of prepare for it or how to kind of integrate it that can be useful. For example, like the research has revealed two qualities of going into a psychedelic experience that are predictive of positive outcomes is being able to surrender to the experience and being able to accept what comes up, going in with a state of acceptance to whatever it comes up, seemingly good or bad, or challenging or not, and being able to surrender and let go are, really important predictors of positive response. And I guess that it makes kind of intuitive sense as well, but that's something that the research has also revealed. So I think it is useful to do the research to sort of to kind of shine a light on these different areas.
Yeah, and one part of this publication is also obvious about nature relatedness, and you talked a little bit about it, but can you tell maybe, why is it important for a person to maybe increase their nature relatedness? What kind of benefits would they gain from this?
Sure. So nature relatedness from the perspective of the individual, without considering anything sort of wider than that. There's a robust body of research and scientific evidence to show a deep association between nature connectedness or nature relatedness and psychological well-being. Particularly a form of well-being called eudaimonic well-being, which is kind of capturing, finding meaning in life, living a meaningful life, and vitality, self-actualization. And then you've also got hedonic well-being, which is more concerned with pleasure, feeling good, happiness. And in fact, nature connectedness or relatedness is robustly associated with both of these forms of well-being. So one study, interestingly, looked at a variety of different factors. So socioeconomic status, visits to local green space, nature documentary viewing, and nature connectedness. And interestingly, it found that nature connectedness had a much stronger association, I think about 4 times as strong association with this form of well-being, eudaimonic well-being, than socioeconomic status did. Which is usually a fairly reliable predictor of different sort of like well-being parameters. Um, and similar findings actually with hedonic well-being and happiness. It seems that yeah, nature connectedness has a similar effect size to income, education, things like that. So I think to put it like short and sweet, it yeah, it feels good and it's good for you to connect with nature. And I would consider it actually, based on the research that's been done, that cultivating nature connectedness is a pathway to human flourishing. Certainly not the only pathway, but it is a pathway. And until quite recently, a somewhat neglected pathway, I think. But yeah, it's very important for the individual and their capacity to truly thrive and flourish.
Also, in the same study, you mentioned that the increase in nature relatedness after a psychedelic experience was dependent on the extent of ego dissolution and the perceived influence of natural surroundings. Could you elaborate on this connection as well? Like, what's the mindset should be like, or what's the natural surroundings in a sense?
Yeah, well, so it's kind of like from the non-psychedelic nature-based like nature connection literature, nature-based settings, in active engagement and appreciation for nature in nature-based settings is a pathway to nature connectedness. So it kind of makes intuitive sense that if you're having experiences in nature to begin with, there's more likely to be an association with nature connectedness. I mean, it doesn't always go together. Just going outdoors into nature doesn't necessarily feed into your connection to nature. Like if you're kind of passively, superficially engaging with nature, where it's essentially like a backdrop, a pleasant backdrop for other activities that you might be doing, but you're not really taking it in. You're not really taking the time to stop and smell the flowers and see the sunlight through the trees and this stuff. That appreciation and the emotional component of that, so feelings of wonder and awe and fascination, being moved by what you're encountering in some way. That's really important for nature connectedness. It's much more relational, emotional, experiential than it is logical, rational, or knowledge based. So yeah, having a nature-based setting, particularly when you're present in it while in an altered state under a psychedelic, where you become a bit more sensitive to your environment, well, much more sensitive to aspects of your environment. I think that's important. And as mentioned before, the ego dissolution side of things, there's been a few studies, a few web-based survey studies that have found an association between ego dissolution and nature relatedness or nature connectedness change under psychedelics. But to be honest, I feel like more work needs to be done on this, because I've been part of a collaborative study with Imperial College, and we're still sort of crunching. Well, yeah, we've crunched the numbers. We're just weaving the results together now. But interestingly, in our study, which was kind of quite rigorous in the sense that it had two different groups, a clinical group and a healthy group. Placebo controlled, or an active placebo in the case of the clinical group, and it was prospective. So it was like it was assessing people before, post, 3 months, 6 months. So we had these nice snapshots in time, and we got to kind of control it as well. And interestingly, we didn't find ego dissolution to have much of an association. It was a really quite weak sort of predictor of changes in nature connectedness. And that's the reason I think that is that ego dissolution in some sense is kind of, it's tied to other experiential aspects of the psychedelic experience. So I feel like the states of unity and interconnectedness that people report under psychedelics are kind of linked partly to that slight loss or diminishment of the ego. So I think that's why there's maybe this seeming like correlation between them, even though we didn't find that really in our study. I published with some collaborators, we published a paper recently, transpersonal ecodelia, and in that we were trying. It was a qualitative paper, and we were trying to shed some light on how and why psychedelics affect people's relationships with nature. Like, there's been quite a few studies now demonstrating an association, or like this shift in nature relatedness, nature connectedness following a psychedelic experience, be that singular or multiple. But there hadn't really been any work looking at how and why, like what's actually changing for people, what are they experiencing that's kind of making them recalibrate their relationship with nature. And we found quite a few different like core themes that sort of predicted this shift, but by far the most important were experiences of interconnectedness under the psychedelic. And as I mentioned before, like one of the aspects of nature relatedness is this feeling of being part of nature, of being part of a wider interconnected web. So it seems like psychedelics can provide quite a reliable hotline to that aspect of nature relatedness. And I feel like that may be what ego loss or diminishment is allowing access to, is those deep states of unity and interconnectedness. And it's actually specifically those aspects of the psychedelic experience that are quite important. Like, not just limited to them, but I feel like that's an important part of the story here.
Nature-based settings can have psychologically soothing properties, which may complement all stages of psychedelic therapy, right? So compared to, I don't know, taking it in at home or some other place, like what changes? Then you're taking in the nature-based setting and at home maybe, or somewhere else.
Firstly, I should like caveat that and say, like compared to say the clinical model and approach of using psychedelics, where effectively like the clinical space or room is acting as a kind of security container, and it's like very much controlled environment. The thing about nature-based settings, even somewhere as tamed and manicured and managed as the wilds of the UK, nature's obviously to some degree inherently unpredictable and uncontrollable, and there are potentially factors outside of your control, be that like weather, encounters with other humans, encounters potentially with other wildlife like mosquitoes or midges. There's like there's considerations that need to be made with regard how you might use psychedelics in a kind of more nature-based setting, but particularly if we're thinking about mental health treatment. But that being said, it's a kind of reoccurring theme from people who do use psychedelics kind of naturalistically outside of a clinical context, is that a non-trivial amount of people, it seems, will think favorably of nature-based settings. Some people will only use psychedelics in nature-based settings, or seek them out when they're having otherwise challenging experiences. And this kind of makes sense because it's we have a deep evolutionary association with nature-based settings. We're kind of physiologically and psychologically wired to respond well to nature-based settings. And there's a solid and growing body of evidence to show that when you have contact with nature-based settings, your anxiety and stress levels come down. It enhances well-being and mood. And for instance, going into a psychedelic experience with feelings of anxiety or feelings of mental preoccupation, things like that are predictors of adverse or kind of challenging reactions potentially for psychedelics. So it seems that there's restorative aspects of being in nature that can potentially feed into a psychedelic experience and sort of potentially have some benefits for people. This is more of an anecdotal thing, but one thing I've noticed that keeps cropping up, and I'm not aware of like specific kind of work looking at this, but I think some people say when they do psychedelics indoors, be that in a clinical space or kind of like a recreational indoor space, even if it's a cozy space, like someone's, bedroom or home or something like that. People can sometimes report, and I've noticed this, and bearing in mind, this isn't like I'm not extracting this from studies, this is just stuff I've read and been told. But people report when they do psychedelics indoors, they can sometimes feel a little bit boxed in, and it's like the walls of the structure they're in kind of direct their sort of like mental um, sort of focus inwards, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. Actually, depending on context, that's a big part of the clinical approach. Is you go inwards and you shine a light in the darkest corners of your mind. But a lot of people report like as soon as they step outside into nature, there's this kind of like expansion of the awareness. You're no longer being boxed in by those structures, and some people it seems they report feeling grounded and relaxed and de-stressed by that sort of immediate shift to a much wider outward focus.
Okay, I see. I mean, I understand, talking about psychedelics is still, very volatile. I mean, it's a bit volatile when it comes to researches. You can't find everything on the research. But okay, so in the end, what I get from this is even if when you don't take psychedelics, when you go to nature outside, it reduces anxiety and all that. Maybe that help. Maybe that's why it helps. Yeah.
And then I'm interested in, things like awe, like the experience of awe has been linked to sort of a fundamental aspect of how psychedelics work, is they can reliably induce states of deep awe. But nature itself is also known for being a reliable kind of elicitor of states of awe. And I feel that, yeah, so states of awe, and we know from the wider research literature that experiencing awe is really beneficial to us as humans. It reduces levels of mental distress, increases pro-social feelings towards other humans and the environment. It has a whole sort of broad range of benefits, and I feel that, yeah, potentially states of awe and also connectedness as well, general connectedness as well as nature connectedness, might be more accessible in nature-based settings compared to, say, a more indoor clinical-based setting. Just to like finish that, I think it's complex. I think there's a variety of different factors in the mix. There's like the de-stressing, the de-anxiety effects, but then there's also the qualities the nature-based settings also bringing aside to that, potentially more awe,
And also, it's a bit
connectedness.
personal, right?
Yes, exactly. It is as well. Um, well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of, the psychedelic experience is obviously deeply personal and subjective. According to the user, we have the concept of set and setting. So the set is kind of, referring to the mindset, like the psycho kind of cultural like set that you go into the experience. So, where you're at in your life, who you're with, your previous kind of experiences, your motivations or intentions for having that experience, all those different factors, and then obviously the setting, the environment that you're in, and those factors in combination have a hugely powerful effect on sort of determining the outcomes. If we think of psychedelics as non-specific psychic amplifiers, which I think is quite a useful way of thinking about them, that sort of suggests strongly that, yeah, it's the contextual factors of set and setting that sort of really predict the outcomes. So, yeah, the psychedelic experience itself is deeply personal and subjective, but then, as already mentioned, our relationship with nature is similar in that it's also deeply personal and subjective. But they both have an overlap in that nature connectedness and the psychedelic experience are strongly, they're experiential and emotional experiences. that can kind of like sometimes defy, they're not sort of strictly linear logic rational base. They're more kind of hitting you in the feels, in your emotions, and it's all about kind of direct experience. And I feel like that's an interesting aspect of psychedelics, in that experiences of interconnectedness and perspectives of interconnectedness are very commonly ascribed to them. And that's kind of interesting from my perspective. For instance, as an ecologist, like, ecology is essentially the science of the interconnection and interdependency of living systems. But it's kind of like a detached scientific, objective way of understanding that sort of relationship of things to other things. The psychedelic experience is different but similar. It's like a different pathway to a similar perspective, but it gives you kind of the experience, the direct experience of interconnection, compared to, say, the more detached academic understanding. So both have their place. Like, they can sort of lead you to a similar place, but through very different means, if that makes sense.
We talked about a lot about psychedelics, and I want to get back to it as well. But one thing that was lingering on my head was, you said, I've been quite lucky, and I had, when we were first talked about your experiences, when I asked you about your experiences on um, ecology, defining moments, and all that. So one of my other questions was, you've conducted ecological fieldwork in various parts of the world. Can you share one of the most profound experiences you had during these field trips, and how it might have influenced your research that we're talking right now?
Yeah, I've had some pretty good, amazing adventures, really, like in different parts of the world. So Vietnam and Ethiopia, Texas, Catalonia, the Mediterranean, um, and yeah, in terms of, yeah, it's hard to kind of like pinpoint. So I've had a few pretty cool experiences on the way. When I was doing a loggerhead sea turtle conservation voluntary project one summer, quite a few years ago now, in Catalonia, and that was an amazing experience. But I had a experience of swimming with this loggerhead sea turtle for about half an hour. And this turtle was not scared of me. There wasn't like, I had a few near miss with a never turtle that unfortunately had some fishing line attached to it, and I couldn't get close enough to do anything about it. It was just gone when I got near, and like, wow, they can move and they want to. But this other turtle was totally chilled out and at peace. So I just got to hang out with this huge sea turtle as it was going about its day, having a bit of grazing and eating, and that was really cool. I mean, I quite like traveling and getting to explore. So I do feel really lucky that I've been able to do work and do research, and then get to see some amazing parts of the world. I mean, it was amazing in Peru to explore some proper prime rainforests. Like one of the kind of global centers for biodiversity. Like, that's one of the hot spots. Like, it doesn't get much richer in terms of the diversity, richness of life there than anywhere else on the planet. Vietnam was amazing for that as well. The rainforest in Vietnam, at night, the forest floor would be like hooching with bioluminescent fungi, and I like fungi anyway. But I'd not seen that kind of thing before. I don't remember it from Peru, but for some reason, yeah, the forest in Vietnam really put on a show at night. Um, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be, pinpointing experience in a sense too. What I think is, when you go to another country, I mean, you specifically spend time in nature, in the line of your work too. But even seeing a different culture and different kind of country can change your perspective looking at the world, right? So what I wanted to ask was, in a sense, when you go into all these different kind of countries, what kind of perspectives did it change? It might be related to your work. Maybe you started looking at your work a little bit differently, or maybe, it doesn't even have to be your work, but, looking at the world or friends or family or anybody a little bit more differently after switching up?
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I guess so. Like, I've definitely been, I guess, humbled through some of the travels that I've had in different parts of the world. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of like it's fascinating being an ecologist, and obviously, this is my here in the UK, this is kind of my native land where I grew up, and I'm familiar with the wildlife here, and so it's quite special getting to go to a completely different other part of the world with a completely different environment. Going to the tropics, for example, and um, yeah, just sort of like getting to see getting to see life that's kind of adapted to totally different conditions to here, and seeing how rich and diverse it can be in color, in form, in structure. Like, um, yeah, so it's sort of like, but then even, going somewhere in the UK. So a few weeks ago, I had a week's holiday with some friends on the west coast of Scotland, and um, even here on this little island I live on, like there's pockets of richness and wildness to be found that feel kind of familiar, but at the same time like you're somewhere, you've gone somewhere else, kind of far away. I mean, I went for a few years ago. I've been a few times actually, but went to the Carpathian foothills in Romania, um, and that was amazing to me because it feels like a very familiar environment. Like it's a temperate environment like it is here in the UK, and I kind of see quite a lot of familiar species that you get here as well there, but there's just much greater richness. Nothing tends to dominate in the same way, and you just get much greater variety and richness. Like the wild flower glades there are just like astounding compared to anything I've seen here. I mean, we've lost most of our wildflower meadows here in the UK. So, and like what I was saying before about, the shifting baseline syndrome, and like how kind of people's expectations about what good, rich nature is kind of like are eroded over time. I was thinking like the perspective shift that could potentially come about by taking people somewhere like that, and showing them like this is what it could be, or like this is what it once was and could be again. Maybe not exactly the same, but it at least potentially gives some people like some kind of like comparison or barometer, or like some kind of vision to potentially work towards, even if it's not achievable. It's still a very noble enterprise to try and work towards achieving it.
Okay, awesome. Then let's get back to a little bit of more research, right? I'm trying to keep things a little bit balanced, right? So in the research you've discussed the potential synergistic effects between psychedelic administration and nature contact for the improvement of mental health. So could you share a practical application of this, like how the mental health becomes better?
Yeah, the main thing I wanted to try and get away with that review paper that I wrote was, well, firstly, there are some overlaps in how contact with nature or connection with nature and psychedelics um, work to bring us benefits. So things such as connection or mindfulness, things like this that can result from or associated to psychedelic use, they also um, seem to be kind of evoked by having contact with or connection to nature. So I firstly wanted to just shine a bit of light on these, I guess, overlapping shared mechanisms by which nature and psychedelics can potentially benefit mental health, and then from that make a case that there's, as well as them overlapping, there's potential synergy here as well. Because I'd not really seen anyone yet at the time before I wrote the paper kind of make the case for psychedelics as nature connectedness enhancing interventions, essentially. Like, there's obviously been a lot of clinical work on psychedelics looking at how they can help things like major depression and addiction, existential anxiety, things like this, and that's all important, commendable work. Um, but I essentially wanted to kind of like shed some light on how important nature connectedness is, the fact that it's being diminished and is still being eroded in much of the Western world, and highlight some of the research that had been done with psychedelics to show that they can enhance nature connectedness potentially, and then also talk about how you could maximize, how you could go about potentially maximizing the nature connectedness enhancement that psychedelics might yield, and say, this is potentially like an independent um, pathway to mental health gains that isn't really being considered right now, and also is likely to be limited or capped by the clinical model and approach. And I'm certainly not trying to attack that or tear that down. That's absolutely got a valid place. And but yeah, if the aim of the game is shifting people's relationships to nature for the potential mental health benefits of that, then the using them in the clinical model as it exists now will definitely limit that.
Okay, so then I understand that you wanted to more focus on nature relatedness when doing your work, but looking maybe I mean I couldn't look all the research thoroughly. So what I was trying to ask is maybe in 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 people who have taken in the research, right? Maybe they've had some mental health problems, and it helped. Maybe like something like that occurred in any of your researches.
So the kind of research that I've been involved in, so qualitative work, looking at how and why people's relationships to nature changes, um, and also kind of the prospective surveys, web-based surveys. We've not really, people have alluded to, for instance, in the qualitative study, that their change in their relationship with nature has benefited them, but we're not really sort of like the kind of research I guess I've been involved in hasn't really been looking at that much, to be honest. But hopefully, this is something that it would be really good, I think, to see more work on. Is how, for instance, I've been involved with um, a study collaboration with a psychiatrist friend, a research group researching ayahuasca use in a traditional indigenous Shipibo led context in the Peruvian Amazon. And we looked at sort of ayahuasca retreat participation, nature relatedness, and things like anxiety, depression, stress. And in our sample, I have to say, like caveat, it's just an initial pilot study. So we are planning to do a larger follow-up study with more measures, a larger sample group, and then a kind of long-term follow-up as well. This was just a kind of initial pilot study, and we did find an association between the the nature relatedness elicited by participation in the ayahuasca retreat and stress. So there was this negative association. So the more nature related people reported as a result of that participation, the lower stress levels they reported. And that kind of makes sense in to the point where, well, so NR experience, so one of the three subdimensions that make up nature relatedness, NR experience that I mentioned later, is particularly capturing contact with nature. And it seems that experiential aspect of one's relationship with nature is particularly important when it comes to a reduction of stress levels. So it seemed, but what's quite interesting and hard for us to pinpoint is that when people participate in these retreats, they're obviously engaging with ayahuasca ceremonies, usually multiple of them over anything from like a few days to like a week or two. But they're also where the retreat site is situated, there's not really any power there or Wi-Fi, so people have to have kind of a forced digital detox. And we know from other research on nature connectedness that excessive smartphone usage or electronic entertainment technology usage can kind of exacerbate nature disconnection. They can act as a barrier to connecting with nature. So people are disconnecting from technology, and they're also in a very rich Amazonian rainforest setting for an extended few days or few weeks. And so there's also the shamanic context in which the ayahuasca ceremonies are kind of embedded in, and that's also quite nature inspired or nature themed. So we've got the effects of the ayahuasca, the shamanic context, the Amazonian rainforest setting, and the digital detox. So there's a mix of things that could potentially be contributing to changes in nature relatedness. And just given the size of the study and the fact that it's a pilot study, we can't yet start to kind of pick apart to find out what's contributing what. But hopefully, yeah, with follow-up studies, we'll start being able to kind of unpack what's going on there.
Yeah, hopefully, maybe then we'll do a second episode. Who knows? Okay. Right. So, one thing that pops into my mind while we were talking, so you mentioned about like detoxing from social media and all that. I mean, you personally you have Twitter and Instagram, right? So as a person who loves nature and doing psychedelics, so I wonder, do you have a personal routine or practice that helps you maintain the line of work, or like also you said that, and I know this from personal experience as well, using too much social media, too much computers, too much mobile phones really affect your mental health negatively. So like, what's your personal routine or rules for this?
Yeah, so no, social media can definitely be, it can definitely be have a negative impact and like take, and suck up people's time and stuff. I think for me, I don't like tend to use it like that much. I don't use it like particularly like frivolously, I guess you could say. Like usually, like if I'm using something like Twitter or Instagram, it's usually I know some people use them personally for their own personal stuff, and I do use it personally, but it's usually about stuff that's beyond me, bit like bigger than me, like in terms of research or in terms of like other stuff. So I don't really use it as a kind of like strictly personal thing. Obviously it is personal because I'm sharing like work I've been involved in, and some of the research and some of the things like that, but it's quite like wide lens focus, and I don't sort of like share that much content, I guess you could say, on any of the social media platforms. And when I do, I like hope that it's not like too kind of like frivolous, I guess. But I do work a lot on computers because my 9 to 5 job is like remote, sort of computer based. I need to be on Teams and sort of connected to my other people in my company and sort of working online. And then obviously I'm working on my psychedelic kind of research collaborations like on the side of my 9 to 5 job, and that obviously involves more computer work. So my sometimes my days are definitely more computer based than I would otherwise like, but I try. I get outside every day, or really make an effort to, I go running, I go walking, and I try and sort of keep it kind of like this year actually in particular I'm sort of really trying to kind of like maintain a healthy kind of work-life balance, and sort of like if I'm doing like sedentary thinky righty based work, then make sure I'm exercising and getting outside and stuff to kind of keep things balanced. And that seems to be working out well actually, and feeling good from sort of like keeping on the ball with that.
I wanted to ask some other questions about your other researches as well. but we are having a little bit of time problem here. So I want to go on to some of the future questions that I wanted to ask. So as you look towards to the future, what is the next big question or challenge you hope to tackle in your research on nature connectedness and psychedelics? What's the next thing?
I don't know how much. I guess I'm going to see it because it's not that easy in some sense doing research from outside of academia. I'm an independent researcher. I collaborate with people like groups like Imperial College, my psychiatrist friend. I mentioned Simon Ruffle in the doing work in the Peruvian Amazon. My friend David Luke, based at Greenwich. So I collaborate with a few different people and organisations. And do what I can, I guess, from the sidelines outside of academia. But it kind of, I don't get any funding, support to do any of this work. So I only have limited power in some sense to kind of just do new studies, which obviously like take time and money and stuff like that. So I have to do that work as a collaborator, which is great, and I'm really grateful for. I love working with these various different groups of great people. So I don't feel kind of hard done by, but I'm just saying like my capacity for like embarking on new research projects is in some sense limited because it's got to be in collaboration with other people. I can't just go it alone or do sort of my own thing entirely. But I do get freedom though, being outside of academia, to kind of link up with particular people that I like and work with them, which is great. In terms of future, I guess there's a few future avenues that might be worthy of exploring here. So yeah, I'm working on a collaboration with Imperial College looking at the effects of psilocybin on nature connectedness, and that's still in the pipeline. But I'm quite excited about that because it will hopefully demonstrate slightly more solid, rigorous evidence for the capacity of psychedelics like psilocybin to shift people's relationships with nature, due to the fact that it's a prospective, placebo-controlled studies. In fact, two of them together that we're considering. And in some senses, like the blinded, controlled, placebo-controlled studies, prospective controlled studies is kind of considered the gold standard in science. Like you need to have a control group, you need to have the prospective study design for it to be kind of considered more rigorous than say a retrospective survey study where you're just looking back in time, which is has very much has its place. But doing that kind of work, you can only ever show an association. You can't demonstrate any kind of causal relationships. So it would be good, I think, to have some more solid and rigorous scientific evidence on the table. But beyond that, I think what's important for kind of a future study is to really nail down the effect of setting and how that influences changes in nature connectedness. Because the survey study that I was involved in, we were simply gathering data on whether people had access to nature-based settings and the degree to which they felt them to be important. But that's sort of like quite kind of, and those nature-based settings could vary from like a small suburban garden to like pristine Alaskan wilderness, say, and everything in between. So to better standardize and get a handle on the effects of nature-based settings, we need to be able to standardize the nature-based setting. We need to be able to control that so that people have access to basically the same setting rather than a whole like mix and variation of settings. And that will better elucidate the contribution of nature-based settings on shifts in nature connectedness as a result of psychedelic use. That also potentially means giving psychedelics in a nature-based setting, which is problematic in itself. Like certainly here in the UK, you can't administer psychedelics out of a monitored licensed research hospital setting. So your only options here would be to bring nature into the clinical space itself. If you can't take people out of the clinical space, there might be a bit more flexibility in the Netherlands, say, where the laws were a bit more relaxed regarding like psilocybin in truffle form, but still quite restrictive actually. So it will be challenging to arrange a study such as this. And also what I think is an interesting question is, there's a good body of evidence to show an association between nature connectedness and pro-nature behaviors and attitudes. people who are more connected to nature tend to do more to protect or restore nature. It's associated with feelings of protection and stewardship towards nature, and sometimes, yeah, active behavior towards it. But so, what I think would be an interesting thing to explore, like now we've got this growing evidence base linking psychedelic use to changes in nature connectedness. Um, it would be interesting to explore to what degree, if at all, do these psychedelic changes in nature connectedness translate to actual behavior change. It's all very well. It's all very well. Say, feeling more connected to nature or more of a part of nature as a result of your psychedelic use, but that it doesn't necessarily translate to actual behavior change. So there's this. We need to kind of mind the gap. Like the underground in London, like you mind the gap between the tube train and the platform edge, and we need to kind of mind the gap between, you know, self-reported changes in awareness around nature connectedness and then actual behavior change, because there is a gap there. It's possible to feel more nature connected without actually behaving in a way that might reflect that. So yeah, and then also look at changes, like, are people choosing to spend more time in nature as a result of their psychedelic use? Because if they are, that potentially has significant implications for their health and well-being across the lifespan. I mean, yeah, time in nature, there's a good, robust body of evidence to show that, yeah, time in nature is really good for our physical and psychological health. So it'd be interesting to kind of unpack more to what degree psychedelics might be causing nature-based lifestyle changes for people, because that has important implications for health and well-being. So, and then, to what degree perhaps the changes in nature connectedness catalyzed by psychedelics, is there also kind of concomitant changes in, say, consumerist and materialistic attitudes as well, that might be kind of partly embedded in that or in some way linked? So yeah, I see that there's a few interesting potential avenues where research could be taken forward here.
One question that I asked to every other my guest is, could you share any books, authors, or thinkers that have profoundly influenced your work and worldview?
Yeah, I mean, I've got loads of books actually, but like particularly influential ones. So I'm reading right now. I'm reading a book called Reconnection, and that's by this guy Miles Richardson, Professor Miles Richardson. So he heads the Nature Connectedness Research Group at the University of Derby, and I'm about halfway through it actually. And I'm kind of, and I gifted a copy to my friend who's doing a PhD on nature connectedness, and that's been really interesting because it kind of gives an overview of all the research that's been done on nature connectedness, but also looks at how and why we've got to the state that we have in terms of our disconnect, what the pathways are to reconnect, and how we can actually go about reforging that connection to nature, and just about the author's own journey with it. Like, interesting to note to me, like working in environmental consultancy and nature recovery, nature restoration, that as his connection to nature kind of blossomed and grew, his relationship with nature outside himself changed, and he went from having quite a manicured garden to having a much more wild, nature-rich garden. And I just found that really interesting, that his inner world, in terms of his inner relationship with nature, was reflected in outer world changes in how he kind of chose to sort of have his garden. So that's been quite useful, because I kind of want to make sure, I try to keep abreast of all the research, but it's nice sort of like having a good comprehensive accessible overview of what's going on. And his work has been pretty important when it comes to this area of nature connectedness. So it's not, it's a relatively new area. It's only really been researched the last 20 years, last 10 years in any kind of like sort of like more kind of thorough way. So it's quite a new field, but quite an exciting field in terms of like, it's a fascinating and powerful leverage point, the nature connectedness, because as I've mentioned, it's deeply tied to human flourishing and well-being, but it's also a key predictor of pro-nature behaviors. And that it seems a pretty important topic at this time of a growing global mental health crisis and a global environmental crisis. It's like I feel that disconnect not just to nature, but partly disconnect more broadly to ourselves, to others, and nature. Are likely a big root of both of those major issues. They're fueling both of those major issues that we face as a civilization, as a species on this planet right now. And nature connection, and developing that, enhancing that, like bringing that into the limelight, making it a core focus. That has potential. That can help act as a salve for both of those issues to some degree. So yeah, that's being quite useful. Yeah, there's a guy. I think I think I don't know if I think he might be an Australian guy. He's either Australian or South African. I'm not actually sure. I don't know if he's done any books, but he's done some great talks. And I've actually emailed him through his website literally just a few days ago, just to kind of reach out and connect, because I really like his output. A guy called Matt Zalistra, and he's a nature connectedness researcher, but like me, he's also an ecologist and a naturalist and a nature lover. And he focuses a lot on kind of experiential nature courses to reconnect people with nature, including conservationists, like professionals who work in kind of conserving or restoring nature. And yeah, he's got a paper called "Connectedness as a Core Conservation Concern," and there's not that much of his published literature out there, but it's a coming from my perspective anyway, like it's a fantastic paper, and like one of the most interesting, compelling papers that I've read in the domain of nature connectedness, and I've read quite a lot as part of my work. So he's quite an inspiring, interesting individual. I don't know if I've not seen a book that he's done, but yeah, I'm hoping to kind of connect with him and maybe even trying to find a way of collaborating, because I really really like what he's kind of putting out into the world.
By the way, you focused on your when I asked this question about any books others like influenced your work and worldview. Also, there's the worldview part. So maybe if any, like it doesn't have to be just your work, right? Like maybe if any, when you were in high school or like elementary school, right? I mean, this kind of things happen. You meet with someone or like you read something and then it changes looking at the things. So yeah, if there's any like that, we would appreciate hearing it.
Yeah, I don't know if I can pin down a specific book.
Sometimes when you ask, what's your favorite movie, and or like, you can't really name it. Maybe it's a bit something like that,
No, I mean, there's definitely been a number of books that I guess that have sort of like I've appreciated for different reasons, and have kind of like, I guess, increased my um, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's funny with nature connectedness, like what I was saying. It's primarily an experiential, emotional thing. It's not really a knowledge-based type of thing. But I feel like once you get to kind of the deeper levels of it, um, having knowledge about how things interact, interrelate, and depend on each other, that can be a source of deepening awe and wonder. You see these links and connections between things that were otherwise invisible or veiled to you. And I feel like that can, add to the sense of wonder and awe. And I think some books like can, be very kind of helpful in shining light on some of those connections and associations between things.
yeah. And by the way, do you have a dog?
Yeah, well, yes, I do, but that's not my dog, which isn't Yappy. That's next door neighbour's dogs. I'm afraid.
Okay, so I think we are having a bit delay now. So I am I think I'm done with my questions. So do you have any other commentaries, anything that you want to tell to our audience?
Well, yeah, I guess I would quickly say, I would encourage anyone listening who's open to it to, if they don't already feel that they have, a relationship or connection to nature, it's never too late to start, and it's all the foundation of it really is awareness and where you choose to put your awareness. It doesn't take much time to build a bond with nature. In fact, the research has revealed time in nature is not a predictor of nature connectedness at all. It's much more about meaningful moments of connection. So appreciation and, yeah, taking the time to be aware, to appreciate, to acknowledge, and engage, and those feelings of wonder and fascination and awe and gratitude and compassion. So, yeah, I would encourage people to kind of like turn on and tune in their awareness to what's on around them. And there's still nature to be found in urban environments as well, but just in your day-to-day life, as you're out and about or wherever you are, just tune in to what you can see and hear and smell. And like the more you start to do that, the more it will pay you back, and it will potentially kind of like enrich and enliven and invigorate your life and benefit you.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. If you want to follow Sam or look at his research, you can find his researches on researchgate.net/profile/Sam-Gandy-4. And if you want to follow him on social media, he has a Twitter account, which is twitter.com/SamWiseGandy. Also Instagram.com/SamWiseGandy. And I'll link all those into the description. And if you have any other blog or anything that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, no, I don't actually. I've been told I should get a website going at some point, and I've not got round to it yet. So yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah. I mean, having a website kind of, yeah, cleans up everything. People can see where can they follow you everywhere. So that would be nice for sure. Okay, so I've enjoyed our conversation and I've learned a lot, that's for sure. And thank you for coming in.
Cool. Well, yeah, no, it's been fun. Thanks for having me. Been good to chat.
And this is it for us. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye bye.